Luckin Coffee. On April 2nd, 2020, if you scanned for financial news, you could have found a headline like this. Shares of China Luckin Coffee plummets 80% after investigation finds COO fabricated sales. When I saw that headline, I thought at first it was a typo because it's a massive, humongous move, guys. The stock price has recovered somewhat that day, but the next few days it continued to drift lower until it was completely halted on April 7th by Nasdaq exchange due to pending news. So in this video I want to discuss three things. First, what has really happened to Luckin Coffee? Second, why the stock trading on Luckin Coffee was halted and how long the halt will last. And third, what could happen next? I'm going to go over some scenarios of what might happen to Luckin Coffee when it eventually reopens and if it eventually reopens. So I hope you like this video, and if you do, please smash that like button, subscribe to my channel and write me some comments because I'd like to hear your reaction on Luckin Coffee and the scenarios I'm gonna go through. So what has really happened to Luckin Coffee? Luckin Coffee, which was once labeled as Starbucks of China, has razzle-dazzled the investors recently by going from just about 0 to 4,500 locations in just 2 years. Wow, that's just an incredible growth, guys. To tell you the truth, I've never heard of such a meteoric business growth in my 20+ years investment career. I mean, they make Starbucks look like a bunch of jokers. It took years and years for Starbucks to build that kind of a business, and they just went virtually overnight 0 to 4,500 locations. In fact, in January, the company said that by the number of locations, it had passed Starbucks. That's just insane. So how did they do it? Well, according to Luckin Coffee, by offering an all-electronic ordering and trying to build a customer base with smaller locations formatted for convenience and offering steep discounts, generally charging significantly less per cup of coffee than other coffee chains. I mean, the growth was so explosive that no wonder that many investors, and especially short sellers, started to question how can the company grow so quickly. So apparently someone or somebody, most likely short sellers, started to question if this is all what it seems to be, and actually hired some investigators to keep track of Luckin store ordering, sales, prices, and so on. So in January of 2020, these investigators came up with the 89-page report alleging Luckin Coffee as a fraud. I mean, just look at some of the items on this report, guys. I mean, these guys were not joking. They took it to a whole new different level. I mean, look at this. We mobilized 92 full-time and 1,418 part-time staff on the ground to run surveillance and record store traffic for 981 store days, covering 100% of the operating hours. Wow, that's just a completely different level. I mean, these guys were serious. I mean, they were onto something and they were tracking Luckin Coffee like a hawk. First, it was Muddy Waters Research that tweeted the following. Muddy Waters is short LK will receive unattributed 89-page report alleging LK is a fraud. Number of items per store per day was inflated by at least 69% in 2019 third quarter and 88% in 2019 fourth quarter. Supported by 11,260 hours of store traffic video, we view the work as credible. Less than an hour later that day, another well-known short seller called Citron Research has defended the company by tweeting, Citron Long LK, we also received the report, but all the data from BizCon China and app download and calls with competitors confirm financial. LK business is on fire in China. Citron has respect for Muddy, but this is announcement report will fall short of accuracy. Expect LK management response. Luckin actually responded to Muddy Waters' allegations by calling the short seller's report misleading and false. You can be the judge of who was right in that dispute. But apparently the Muddy Waters was right after all, because on April 2nd, the coffee chain said that an internal investigation had found that its chief operating officer had fabricated 2019 sales by about 2.2 billion yuan, or $310 million. Expenses are believed by the board to be also inflated. The alleged fraud is believed to have begun in second quarter of 2019. The company told investors in its filing that they shouldn't rely on the company's recent financial statements, which are now believed to be inaccurate. The interesting part about this announcement was that it came only a few days after appointing two new independent directors to their board and audit committee. Mr. Pu, who has more than 20 years of work experience in finance and accounting, and Mr. Chong, who has more than 30 years management experience in areas including supply chain, logistics, IT, and manufacturing operation. Apparently, these two new independent members, and this is just a pure speculation on my part, started to dig into the numbers and realized that something is not right here and sounded the alarm. And here, even more interesting facts, guys. If you look at the ownership of the company, Charles Lu, who is the company's chairman, owns around 38% of the shares through different entities. And Jenny Quinn, the CEO, who has 24% stake of Class B shares of the company. That's good because when insiders own a big portion of the company, that's very good in the investor's mind. However, if you read the fine print below the ownership section, you can see that the insiders have pledged most of the shares as collateral to secure the borrowing. In plain English, what it means is that insiders borrowed money against their shares. So, for example, I want to get a loan from a bank. Bank will say, sure, we'll give you the money, but you have to give us something tangible in case you default on the loan. That something tangible in this case was shares of the company's stock. And how about this, guys? Just recently, HALTED Investment, a company that is entirely controlled by Chairman Lu, that's the guy I talked to you about that owns 38% of the company, defaulted on $518 million margin loan to a syndicate of banks led by Goldman Sachs. Now these shares, or some of these shares, banks will want to sell, which in turn may put further pressure on the stock if or when it reopens. So the question number 2 is why the stock halted recently and when will the hold be lifted? Initially, the stock was halted by Nasdaq pending news. Apparently, Nasdaq exchange requested additional financial information on this company, which the company could not provide right away pending its internal investigation. So just recently, Nasdaq exchange changed its hold status on Luckin Coffee to additional information requested. The exchange declined to specify what information is being requested. My best guess is that Nasdaq, besides waiting for the results of Luckin Coffee internal investigation, will also wait for the results of the probe by China's securities regulator. Based on those results and investigations, Nasdaq will make a decision on what to do with Luckin Coffee stock. Again, this is just a pure guess on my part. So, frankly, I don't expect trading in Luckin shares to be unhalted anytime soon. So the question is, what's going to happen next? Well, let me say that it's not all bad news for Luckin Coffee. Let's start with the fact that the company's app saw a huge bump in downloads in the last week in light of these news. Why? Because first of all, Chinese consumers rallying around the company as a form of Chinese nationalism against the American coffee chain Starbucks. Well, for the most part because they want to have a cheaper alternative. Second is the fact that Luckin Coffee sent out a lot of freebies and coupons before to get customers in their stores, and now people are rushing to cash in those coupons because they worry that the company may disappear. So if you look at the balance sheet, the company has $788 million in cash and cash alternatives and about $227 million in total liabilities. So unless there is no such cash position as it was reported previously, we have a net positive of $561 million, which is pretty significant compared to the company's market cap today of $1 billion. Now let's go through some scenarios of what may happen. Again, those are just my guessing, speculation, based on what happened to fraud allegations before. It is in no way reflects on what may happen to Luckin Coffee. I'm doing this for entertainment purposes only. First scenario that I see is the worst case scenario, Enron type scenario. In this case, pretty much all of the financial information is false. There is no cash on the balance sheet as it was reported before. The number of stores is inflated. All the sales are inflated. The company needs to pay to settle investors' lawsuits, fees, and there is debt which it cannot pay. Like I said, this is the very worst case scenario. And in this case, investors will lose their entire investment as the stock will be worth exactly $0.00. Well, in my mind, I estimate it to be a 20% chance of a possibility. Second scenario that I see is that Nasdaq finds too many financial irregularities and stock gets delisted from the exchange. In this case, the stock will not become zero, but the trading will continue on the over-the-counter markets like OTCQB or OTC Pink marketplaces and others. Those provide limited liquidity and usually not good news for the existing investors. In some cases, a stock getting delisted might actually turn out to be a good thing for shareholders. If a company decides to go private instead of remaining publicly traded, it is essentially buying out existing shareholders. In exchange for your shares, for example, the company will offer you cash. Third scenario, and it's more realistic scenario, is that the internal investigations and auditors find more irregularities, but not such major ones as in the first scenario. So in this case, the company will take a major hit, but it's going to be a one-time hit. Luckin Coffee is not the first company that overstated their revenues and profits. I mean, look at this, guys. Many of those companies that you see here also were caught, investigated, and slapped with heavy fines and investor lawsuits, but are still trading on exchanges today. That may happen to Luckin Coffee as well. In this case, I would assume that a clean management sweep will be needed and a new company board will probably be re-elected, with some exceptions, of course. In this case, when shares reopen again for trading, they may go lower, but if I was an existing shareholder, I wouldn't sell it, but rather hold on to it, as the company and the stock may recover in this case eventually. The fourth scenario is that the company such as Tencent Holding will come in and buy Luckin Coffee outright. I'm sure there are other scenarios that I left out, but those are the ones that I could think of. And if you have any thoughts on Luckin Coffee or this video and my scenarios that I went through, please share it in the comments below. And I hope we'll know more about Luckin Coffee and what's going to happen to it very soon. And until then, adios!